This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Back to Green. Curry from the corner at three, puts it in.
I said it before and I'll say it again. How do you make this shot? Backpedaling, deep in the corner, late contested hand down, man down.
No shot. Blocked from behind on Thompson. And here's James playing at home. The Cavaliers making a 4-game sweep. They're headed to the NBA Finals.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Kylie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It has come to this. Two teams, Golden State Warriors, Cleveland Cavaliers, LeBron James, Steph Curry, MVPs getting it on. Man, it doesn't get any better. And we have such an awesome show ahead of us in order to get you guys geared up for what's going to be an awesome NBA Finals. And in order to do that, you know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mac contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net. My big kahuna, PNC, Rough Rider for life, my boy, Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, hanging and tanging and banging on the NBA sites. What's going on, my brother?
Well, salute to you and to all the listeners of The Baseline, man. It's NBA Finals time. We are geared up. We are ready. We have an amazing show in store. Two great, amazing guests lined up for us, man. Can't wait to get right to it.
Most definitely, man. There's awesome stuff happening right now in the association, obviously, and we'll get into a little bit of that. The coaching carousel. We got a special guest, Sean Highkin, to help us break down the recent hirings that are going on. We'll also give you coast-to-coast information and news, our patented Go and Get, in which we discuss the ousting of the Houston Rockets and the Atlanta Hawks. And then, of course, NBA Finals preview. It doesn't get much better. Coming immediately following, man, our man Howard Beck is going to be joining us in a few moments to help us break down this marquee matchup. These Titans, the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers saw awesome stuff, man. This is what we do.
Absolutely, man. But before we get on to that, we have some news we want to pass on. One good and one, obviously, that's very, very, very tragic for us here as hosts of The Baseline. Shout out to our boys at the Bottom Line Sports Show. They're doing some great things over at SiriusXM. They're doing some nightly recaps of the playoff basketball. So if you have SiriusXM, that you're listening to them and following them on Twitter at Beeline Sports as well. But on the side note, we definitely want to send our thoughts and prayers out to our homeboy Mike DeVito, whose dad who passed away not too long ago. We want to have a little moment of silence for him. We love you and we miss you, Mr. DeVito, and all praise is due, man.
Yeah, most definitely. It's tragic. He's part of our family. He's definitely been one of the great guys that we've had an opportunity to spend time with and hang with, and our thoughts and prayers to our boy, to the family. He will be sorely missed, and here at The Baseline, we just want to give our remembrances for what he's done, not just for us, but what he's just done, in general. He's just been a great person, and it's just sad to see him go. So once again, we just want to express our condolences and a moment of silence, for the DeVito family in the loss of Mr. DeVito. Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee and Warren Shaw here on The Baseline, and this is it. NBA Finals time. Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State Warriors. It's on and popping. All eyes will be fixated on really two names who are basically, they jump up off the page when you look at the skill level. They do it in different ways. And I mean, it's just an absolute honor to be able to get one of the great writers, columnists doing their thing right now. Howard Beck, senior writer for Bleacher Report. He's on with us to help us break down this really colossal matchup of two teams with two different ways of getting it done. Howard, thanks for joining us this week on The Baseline.
Yeah, happy to be here, guys. Thanks.
All right, Howard, man, let's get right into it. We're talking about a multiple MVP type of guy, LeBron James. He's trying to write the storybook ending here, getting a title to Cleveland. And then we got the little, the David and Goliath story with Steph Curry. Everyone doesn't think that this guy can do it with the stature that he has, and he becomes an MVP. He's basically trying to finish this storybook ending for the Golden State Warriors. I mean, if you're a writer in your position, how great is it for you to be able to see this type of matchup take place for this year's NBA Finals?
No, it's fantastic. And, one of the great things about it, I think, is just that there's fresh blood in the finals. And I know, it's 5 straight years for LeBron, but the rest of his team, it's a new team. The rest of the Cavaliers haven't been there since 2007. That was a much different Cavaliers team. And LeBron is there, but this is Kyrie Irving's first time, Tristan Thompson's first time, J.R. Smith, Iman Shumpert, and then first time for everybody on that Warriors team. And the Warriors haven't been in the finals in decades. So it's great. Someone's going to end a drought. Either Cleveland is going to end a 51-year championship drought for its entire city, or the Warriors are going to end a 40-year championship drought for that franchise. And, of course, the Bay Area has had plenty of other championships and other sports, so it's not quite the same dramatic effect. It feels like there's not quite as much at stake for the Bay Area as there is for Cleveland. But, those storylines alone are enough to make it intriguing. But as I mentioned, I just like that there's fresh blood in the finals. We've had a lot of years of Lakers and Spurs and Celtics and Heat, and this is a very new matchup with a lot of different personalities coming to that spotlight. And Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, it's a really just a fun team. It's going to be interesting to see how the country responds, because I get the feeling that even though LeBron James really redeemed himself in the eyes of the public and a lot of fans who had kind of, turned on him when he made the decision back in 2010, it was a nice storybook decision and a storybook ending for him to go back to Cleveland to finish out his career and try to bring that long-awaited championship. And I think he, generated a lot of goodwill last summer. And yet with this matchup, I get the feeling that most of the country, aside from Cleveland or people who are hardcore LeBron fans, everyone else is going to be rooting for the Warriors, because even though they won more games, even though they're going to be favored by the odds makers, they feel like the underdog. LeBron is still the Goliath, and there's still a lot of people who, for whatever reason, would rather see him fail. I don't quite understand it, but that's out there. And so all of that's going to be interesting. And then again, the Warriors are just a really fun team to watch, period. The Cavaliers play a little bit more of a bruising style that I don't know it's quite as aesthetic. But it's, regardless, the matchup is going to be fantastic.
When you talk about LeBron being the Goliath, I think that's, an excellent kind of segue into what he's been able to do to get this Cavaliers team here into the NBA Finals in 2015. How do you compare this run, though? I know the teams are different, but I know there's been a lot of talk about the comparisons between his 2007 team that he got when they played the San Antonio Spurs and got swept out. Which is more impressive to you, this run this year with all the injuries that they've had, or that run back in 2007?
I think the 2007 run remains his most impressive, because that was one of the worst teams ever to make the NBA Finals. He's a Hall of Famer, but the LeBron of 2007 was not quite as skilled, as developed, as mature as LeBron James of 2015, and his surrounding cast was considerably worse. That team, Larry Hughes and Boobie Gibson, and Verjao was a decent player. Ilgauskas was good but not great, and he'd gone through a lot of foot injuries, and Sasha Pavlovich and the rest of this group. That was a bad team to make the finals, and it was a testament to LeBron's talents, and also the relative weakness of the Eastern Conference that he got them there in 2007. This run feels a little like that one, because they lost Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving's been on one leg, and what's left is better than that 2017 Cavaliers team, but it's not great. It's not a great team. There's no other all-stars there. J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert, these guys were throwaways. The Knicks couldn't wait to dump them. And Matthew Dellavedova was nowhere and was nobody. And Timofey Mozgov, thrown in the Carmelo Anthony trade years ago, no one, outside of hardcore NBA fans knew who Timofey Mozgov was. LeBron James has turned everyone into household names and stars. Tristan Thompson, had a phenomenal postseason, in part because Love is gone, and in part because LeBron James makes everybody look so damn good. It's not that this team is that bad. There's good players, but LeBron has made them all look great. And, I do think, and I wrote this last week, that this is among the more impressive accomplishments, because he went back to Cleveland to have younger stars around him, to have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. And when it came right down to it, he had no Kevin Love in this playoff run for the last two rounds. And Kyrie Irving has not been anywhere near his, full strength or full effectiveness. So I think it's absolutely impressive.
Howard Beck joining us here on The Baseline, senior writer for Bleacher Report. He's also the co-host for NBA Sunday Tip, which you can catch 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bleacher Report Radio. Howard, let's go right into the matchup. And what we're talking about here with and you would point out some really good points about how this type of run with LeBron James making his surrounding cast that much better and standing out. You know, I've been reading a lot of different articles, and a lot of people are really trying to look at the advanced metrics, I guess, to justify, you know, how exciting this game is going to be. But I want to get from your perspective, simply put, what is it going to take for this Cleveland Cavaliers to best this Warriors team who, top to bottom, they look like the much deeper and much more talented team. Forget about who they played against the Western Conference. It's just the way that they have been moving the ball efficiently and shooting the basketball. What is it going to take for LeBron James and his cast members to best this Golden State Warriors team in the NBA Finals?
Well, they're going to have to play the kind of defense we've seen the last several weeks. They weren't a great defensive team during the regular season. They've been better in the postseason. Part of that has to do with who they're playing. I mean, look, the Celtics weren't exactly a real playoff team. That was a rebuilding team that should have been in the lottery. So their postseason defensive stats are a little skewed by the fact that they played a Celtics team that was, you know, had no true NBA starters on it, frankly. A Bulls team that was not offensively that diverse and was, you know, kind of sputtering, and a Hawks team that got injured. So it's hard to judge where the defense is, but it's been pretty impressive. They're going to need to be as dominant as they've appeared to shut down what is a very powerful, potent Warriors offense. Warriors ranked second in the regular season by just a hair behind, I think, the Clippers for the best offense in the NBA. You know, I don't think necessarily means shutting down Steph Curry, although that would be a start, but, you know, they can go a lot of different directions. And while they generate most of their points from Curry and Klay Thompson and then they're shooting, they've got other guys who can get hot on any given night, Harrison Barnes and Draymond Green, guys off the bench like Iguodala or Livingston. So we'll see how that goes. On the flip side of it, you know, just in terms of the Cavaliers offense, you know, is Dellavedova going to keep up this run? I mean, he's been pretty good, but he's not a guy who generates one of his own shots. He's pretty much a spot-up shooter. He's not really a true point guard. J.R. Smith, Iman Shumpert. J.R. Smith's always been streaky. You can have the 28-point game one night and then go, you know, 2 for 15 the next. You just never know what you're going to get with him, and that's why he's had the frustrating career he's had. And Shumpert been a much better three-point shooter in these playoffs than he had been recently with the Knicks. But again, a guy who can run a little hot and cold, can't put the ball on the court real well. You know, a couple of dribbles okay, but too many dribbles and he's getting himself in trouble. So they don't have, you know, without Kyrie Irving's, ability to, you know, without him being at full strength and his ability to both create for himself and others and you know, get into the gaps of a defense, break the defense down, it puts a lot of pressure on LeBron James. And I feel like that's been the case throughout the playoffs. LeBron James has had to do more in this postseason than almost any playoff series or any playoff run he's been involved in. His usage rate is way up. His effectiveness, his efficiency is down. I think, you know, that worked against the Bulls and the Hawks. Even an inefficient LeBron at a high usage rate worked. But against the Warriors, I don't know that that's going to be enough for them. I think they've got to find other guys to get it going. And you know, maybe with the week off, Kyrie Irving will be closer to healthy.
Well, as you mentioned that week off, I think this is, you know, an important time to bring up, you know, the health of even Klay Thompson and his concussion. Do you think the Warriors will obviously get him back for game one? But if he misses any games or 1 or 2 games in this series, how significantly does that change the impact and the outcome of the series going forward?
The tricky thing with concussions is that, you know, as I understand it from concussion experts, you know, you can't compare any two cases. You know, every concussion and every player's recovery from a concussion are different. And so you can't say, well, it'll be 4 days, it'll be 5, it'll be 7. You just don't know. There are protocols he has to go through, a battery of tests that he has to go through. If he doesn't pass them all, you start over, and you got to wait until you do it, until you get through them all. And there's an NBA appointed physician who has to verify all this. So the Warriors can't just rush him back out there. They're going to be under even more scrutiny because it's the playoffs, because it's the finals. So, you know, Steve Kerr indicated yesterday that he thought he'd be back for game one. But, you know, it's impossible, I think, to know until he's actually been formally cleared. If he is back, that means he's fine. It means his head is clear. It means he's fine, and I would expect we'll see a normal Klay Thompson. If he's not back for game one, Look, people look at the Warriors and think this is this stacked team. I kept hearing that during the season when people were trying to make the case for James Harden for MVP over Steph Curry. The Warriors are somehow stacked. But look, you take Klay Thompson or Steph Curry out of the mix, those are their two main scorers. There's not, there's a lot of other guys who, can make some shots here and there, who've got some specific talents, but nobody else who's just going to fill it up in massive spurts. So I think they'd be in a little bit of trouble without him. I think, if you didn't have Klay Thompson for game one, you might lose home court advantage.
Howard Beck joining us here on the Baseline. Be sure to catch him on the Twitter at Howard Beck. Howard, we're getting into some of these matchups that you were just speaking about a little while ago. And the one that intrigues me more than anything is the matchup that Steve Kerr is going to have on putting somebody on LeBron James. And the more likelihood it's going to be Draymond Green. Now, we've seen LeBron James on how he's taken out Jay Crowder, how he's taken out DeMarre Carroll, and then he also has taken out Jimmy Butler. Now, I probably blame a little bit to the fault of the defensive schemes by the coaches for those teams. But this is an intriguing matchup, in my opinion, because Draymond Green has been able to hold his own against the bigger front court players in the Western Conference. And more so, he's been able to hold his own against guys who like to go ISO. So I'm really intrigued on getting your perspective about how you see Draymond Green possibly matching up against LeBron James during the majority of this NBA Finals, or can it be a possibility that Kerr will kind of throw back and forth with Harrison Barnes and Draymond Green and taking LeBron James?
Well, we'll see. There's not much of a track record to base it on. They played 2 games in the regular season, and LeBron missed one of those games, I believe. So there's not a lot of, there's not much of a template here. I do think that, you do have to mix it up against him. Draymond Green is the best place for them to start just because he's got the best combination of size and strength and agility, that lateral ability. I mean, the reason that Draymond Green has been such an amazing defensive player for the Warriors is that, you can switch everything on pick and roll. He can guard, perimeter players. But, LeBron James is special. He's different. And, no one is guarding him one-on-one. I don't want to say not effectively. You can guard him effectively, but you're still not going to stop him. The key is going to be to challenge him, to put him in uncomfortable positions. And I think to try to make him a jump shooter. If he's driving to the basket, you're done. And his jump shooting has been pretty lousy this postseason. So I would assume that your first strategy against him, especially given the way that the Spurs, dealt with him for the last couple of years, is maybe just to turn him into a jump shooter. Try to clog the lanes, try not to send too much help because it'll pick you apart and hit every open teammate. We know he's a great passer. But I think, making him a jump shooter until he can prove that he's got his jump shot back might be their best bet. But yeah, it'll start with Draymond Green, I assume. That means that Harrison Barnes is now probably having to check Tristan Thompson, which is a bit of a tall order, literally, figuratively. And we'll see how long both teams stay big, or if they, switch to a smaller lineup, which, might actually work to the Warriors' advantage. And they do have Iguodala coming off the bench as another guy to throw at LeBron. So they've got more options of guys who are in that 6'7", 6'8" range, who they can at least try to have guard him. I think they've got more options than anybody else the Cavaliers had faced before. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, the Warriors have, they've been one of the league leaders, I think the league leader actually in the playoffs in terms of fast break points. And you just kind of mentioned it right there about my next question in terms of, do you really see this becoming a series of small ball with, Draymond Green playing the 5 as many times as he did, and then Tristan Thompson being the 5 for Cleveland in that series, and LeBron and Harrison Barnes playing the big 4s? Do you see this really becoming a small ball matchup, leaving some of the guys like Mozgov and Bogut out of the rotations?
It could. We won't know until we get there, right? I mean, the best teams play best, the best teams have the ability to play effectively both big and small. We've seen it from the Spurs over the years. The Heat could do that when they'd have the Chris Anderson and Bosh out there together, or sometimes Bosh as the center with shooters around him. We'll see how it goes and who can force the other's hand. I mean, I think the Warriors have better depth, period, and certainly better backcourt depth, guard depth. They got, the Livingston and Barbosa, and just a lot of ways they can go. So if they're having a tough time with a bigger lineup, and they've got that option. They've got that option. So we'll see.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw with our special guest, Howard Beck, as we're discussing the NBA Finals, giving you a preview. Cavaliers-Warriors Game 1 set to start in a few days. Howard, I've been absolutely amazed with the way that Steph Curry has stepped up and has made the kind of shots that he's made throughout the playoffs. I think, everybody was so intrigued about the way Harden played and the matchup between Harden and Curry. And I think the thing that was never really talked about that amazed me so much is that whenever the Warriors needed to establish or sustain a run, when Steph Curry made that shot, I mean, it was literally like, especially like on the road, people would be like, oh my God, here we go again. And this has been the way Steph Curry has done his thing. It's like he is the person you just don't want shooting the basketball. And I'm really wondering from your perspective, I mean, how impressed are you about what Steph Curry has been able to do? We've just seen what the Warriors did to James Harden, who basically he literally got this guy to force 13 turnovers in one game, the worst in, and that's a playoff record. But with Steph Curry, his ability to stay consistent and still hit the big shot, I mean, is this something magical? Is this something truly unique for a guy of his stature, his ability, and the fact that he's won this MVP award, this run that he's making right now in the playoffs?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Danny Ainge tweeted today. Danny Ainge doesn't tweet very often, but Danny Ainge tweeted earlier today that Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time. And I think some of that has to do with just, recognizing the degree of difficulty. But I think what amazes me about Steph Curry is that he may be the best shooter of all time, not only for his just the raw percentages, his 3-point percentage in particular, his effective field goal percentage, but he can shoot from anywhere, and he can pull it from 26 feet and 30 feet and whatever, and it always looks perfect. And then he has all these ridiculous shots where he's dribbling through traffic, facing away from the basket, flipping around, and then still throwing up a shot that makes it. I mean, and he does that consistently. I was there for that night at Madison Square Garden a couple of years ago where he dropped, I can't remember, 40-something points. And just every type of three-pointer you could imagine. Spot up, pull up, at the arc, 8 feet behind the arc, contested, uncontested. But on top of all of that, and what makes him truly special to me is that we talk all about his shooting, and it completely overshadows what a great point guard he is. The guy's a really great passer. Creative passes in traffic, making the passes that more basic point guards can't make. Seeing the play go, happen before it happens, that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying he's necessarily at Jason Kidd level, but certainly he has a little bit of that Steve Nash flair in him in the way he can penetrate and then find the open guy or just thread the needle. And I feel like that part of his game has been completely overshadowed by what a great shooter he is. But he is special. And LeBron James obviously is one of the all-time greats. So we're getting a chance to see here, two amazing talents, and that's as it should be in the NBA Finals.
Well, as you talk about, these two teams getting into the NBA Finals, they both have rookie head coaches. So I kind of wanted to get your perspective on that in terms of, obviously Steve Kerr was a heavy candidate for Coach of the Year. David Blatt has had his transgressions from people and some disrespect to some degree, but I think Blatt's done a great job making some adjustments in the playoffs. Who do you feel has the edge? I mean, I don't want to just say it's Kerr simply because the Golden State had a better record going into the playoffs, but who do you think has the advantage in this going into the NBA Finals between Blatt and Kerr?
It's interesting. It's a hard thing to assess. You would lean Blatt to an extent because he has more head coaching experience. No, it wasn't NBA experience, and he's only a rookie technically because he's an NBA rookie. But the guy had, years and years overseas, a very successful career, has won championships. So you got to figure, he's not going to be, daunted by the spotlight, the pressure of the situation, any of that stuff. But at the same time, look, Steve Kerr, there hasn't been a single moment this season where you thought, wow, boy, that you can really tell this guy's a first-time head coach, or that he's never even been an assistant coach for that matter. There has been nothing in the Warriors season, the way it's unfolded, the decisions that Steve Kerr has made. There hasn't been a single moment where you doubted his ability. And he's got a phenomenal staff with Alvin Gentry, who's just been named the new head coach of the New Orleans Pelicans as soon as the finals are over. Gentry, a very experienced guy who's been head coach in several places and is a great offensive mind. You've got Ron Adams, widely regarded as one of the top, if not the top assistants in the NBA, who's a fantastic defensive strategist. And so, it's a staff thing. The rest of your staff matters too. And Steve Kerr has been in a number of finals and won championships as a player. So I don't think that you can clearly indicate, either way. But we'll see how they each make their adjustments and how they react to situations. And, we'll know that answer soon.
And before we move on to your prediction, just kind of wanted to get your take on, from each team, the kind of the quintessential, who are your X factors? Is it a bench player or a specific starter? Who are your X factors from each team, Cleveland and Golden State?
Oh man, I hadn't even given it much thought at this point. The Cavaliers, I would lean toward the obvious, which is J.R. Smith, because when he has it going, the guy catches fire, and it doesn't matter what you do. He's just going to make crazy shots.
Howard, that's a lot of leaning, man. That's a lot of leaning if it's J.R. Smith.
It is. Like, but what makes somebody an X factor is that unpredictability, right?
Yes, you are right. It has a David Duchovny type feel of it. Yes, I understand.
The truth about J.R. Smith is out there. So he is an ultimate X factor. With the Warriors, it's different. It's just, I don't know if there's any mysteries with this team or anybody who's just going to just pop out of nowhere one game. I feel like, to an extent, Draymond Green is the X factor, because if he can sustain, the kind of defense we've seen him play, against LeBron, it's different. Obviously, you're not going to stop him. But if Draymond Green can stay out of foul trouble, give LeBron enough resistance, that's the series right there. If you can somehow, disrupt LeBron James, they just don't have that many other options. And, so maybe Draymond Green is the X factor.
Howard, when it comes down to it, and, obviously we all at some point who write and who basically cover the NBA, we got to obviously give predictions. And so, yes, of course, we have to put you on the spot. Who do you see winning this NBA Finals? And does it go 6? Does it go 7? Is it a dominant Warriors team that could sweep? Or does LeBron James write a new chapter in his testament of dominance in the NBA in ousting the Golden State Warriors? Where are you with your prediction?
Yeah, I know I've already been on record as saying the Warriors in 6 and not deviating from that. I just think that, as I said earlier, they've got better depth, better balance. They've been, great offensively, defensively all season long. I haven't seen anything there that indicates any kind of weakness. And the fact is, LeBron James is the best player in the series, and he's the best player on earth. But as we know, that's not necessarily enough. It was only a year ago that LeBron James lost to a better balanced San Antonio Spurs team that didn't even have anybody as great as Steph Curry on it. But the Spurs beat them with great passing and great depth. And it's not like the Heat were, short on talent. They were short on depth for sure. But that, I feel like this Cavaliers team without Kevin Love and with, Kyrie Irving, presumably still not at full speed, that they are closer to that Heat team than people might want to believe. Again, just having LeBron James isn't enough. It makes it hard to bet against any team he's on, but he alone can't do it. He could against Chicago. He could against Atlanta. He can't do it by himself against the Warriors. And I just think that they have too much talent, too much depth, and the home court advantage. And I do see the Warriors winning it in 6, but I will not be surprised if somehow LeBron proves me wrong again.
He is New York Times and LA Daily News alum. He is your senior writer for Bleacher Report and co-host of NBA Sunday Tip, 9 to 11 a.m. on Bleacher Report Radio. And yes, he probably does hate your NBA team. He is the incomparable Howard Beck. Howard, man, thank you so much for helping us break down this NBA Finals and helping our NBA Baseline podcast fans get a better understanding of what really is going to be a great matchup in the next few days.
You got it, guys. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome stuff with my man Howard Beck, man. Shaw, I mean, look, man, that's what it's going to come down to. Beck predicts it in 6. It's an intriguing, very tempting for us to say that this Warriors team is just that good, but I think you think differently.
Well, I mean, I don't think too differently from that. I think, the Warriors are going to win the series. I just don't want to bet against LeBron James. When you have the superstar who's arguably the best player on the planet, and obviously that would make him the best player in the series, he can win 1 or 2 games for you, but he's going against Stephen Curry, who's the MVP. I think it's going to be a very, very long series. I like what Beck said in terms of really don't know how the three-point thing is going to go, don't know what the coaching adjustments are going to be like. Are these teams going to play small? Who does that end up favoring? But at the end of it all, I think Golden State's going to win this in 7. I wouldn't be surprised if they took it in 6, as Howard said, but I like Golden State in 7 winning on their home floor.
Well, I got to tell you something. It's interesting because Howard Beck, in my opinion, he brought up a really intriguing X factor. My X factor is Iman Shumpert, because Iman Shumpert, I think, is going to have the responsibility of handling whatever backcourt that the Golden State Warriors is going to throw out against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's going to be their primary defender. And we've seen where Klay Thompson has had his struggles to be able to get into his offensive groove. And, as much as we talk about how great Steph Curry is, and much as we talk about how great Draymond Green is, if Klay Thompson is having one of those iffy runs shooting the basketball, that's going to be a problem. And, Howard had mentioned that, Klay Thompson is as important a person to talk about in this series as we're going to talk about Klay Thompson and his future, period, is just, his ability to shoot the basketball with a level of consistency. And if Iman Shumpert can be that defensive pest that he's been known to be, it can spell trouble for that offensive flow that Steve Kerr likes to get. Remember, Steve Kerr in the last few games of that Rockets series, he put emphasis on trying to get open shots for Klay Thompson early and often, because he knows that Steph can get his own shot when he wants to, and Draymond Green will always be involved, and he's going to get Bogut involved, and Harrison Barnes has proven that he can get his shot whenever he wants to. It's Klay Thompson, to me, that becomes somewhat of the X factor. So it'll be really intriguing to see. But with all that being said, I think the Golden State Warriors win this, and I'm with Beck. I think that the Warriors are going to take this in 6. As much as I like what the Cavaliers have done defensively in the series against the Atlanta Hawks, and it could be momentum to ride, this Warriors offense, man, is just way too much, and I think it may force David Blatt to make some really critical coaching decisions, which I think will play against them, because I don't think that the personnel is ready for what Steve Kerr is about to dish out with this Warriors team, who I just think are clicking on all cylinders as they make their run into this NBA Finals. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coaching carousel. And my man, let me tell you something, Shaw. You talk about an amusement park of coaching moves that have happened, and we haven't even finished the NBA Finals, but clearly teams are in dire need of direction and change, and they are not hesitant to completely tilt the needle on this one. And to help us break down everything that's been happening right now with the new recent coaching hires, we got our man Sean Highkin. He covers the Chicago Bulls for Bleacher Report, and he's also NBA at large for NBC's Basketball Talk. Sean, thanks for joining us here on The Baseline.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh, man, listen, first things first, man, you're there, you're at the heart of it with everything that has happened with the Chicago Bulls, Coach Tibbs getting ousted and really getting ostracized by the Bulls management. And then just with everything now happening, with all signs and directions pointing towards Fred Hoiberg being the new head coach for the Chicago Bulls, wanted to get your feel and your take. Was this something that really did need to happen, or could there have been a better way on how both parties handled this situation for them to part ways?
Well, I think both sides are kind of at fault here, and it's a thing that's really gone back several years. Really, Tom Thibodeau and Bulls management, Gar Forman and John Paxson, just haven't seen eye to eye about a lot of things. If you go back even 3 years ago to 2012, Tom Thibodeau was really unhappy when management decided not to match the Rockets offer sheet on Omer Asik, and he was unhappy when they let Kyle Korver go basically for nothing to save about $500,000. So he's been a little bit unhappy with some of their moves and, not keeping some of the same players that he wanted them to keep from the years when they were a title contender. And he was unhappy when they let Ron Adams, his lead assistant, go a couple years ago. And obviously Adams is now in Golden State and maybe about to win a championship. So, there were some legitimate gripes on his end. And then on their end, they were not happy with kind of the way he has been handling minutes for guys, particularly, Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, who were coming off knee injuries this past summer. And a couple of years back, Luol Deng had kind of that near-death experience in the 2013 playoffs with the spinal injury that he had. So, it was kind of a situation where both sides were pretty much dug in and not really willing to meet the other side halfway. I would say my read on it is this. I think it was probably the right decision to move on from Tom Thibodeau at this point, but I do think that Bulls management handled it in about the worst way possible with the press release that they sent out and just kind of the way that there have been these anonymous leaks about him over the last year or so. The management really could have handled it better than they did, but it was probably the right decision to make a change in the long run.
When you talk about some of the anonymous leaks, that report came out earlier in the week about 3 potential starters who had an issue and ripped Thibodeau in the exit interviews. Are you buying into any of that? Do you have any idea who those starters may have even been?
I can tell you who it wasn't. I can tell you it wasn't Derrick Rose that was talking bad about him, because Tom Thibodeau always had Derrick Rose's back this entire time. All these last couple of years, he took all this criticism for not coming back maybe as soon as he could have. Tom Thibodeau had his back the entire time. So I can tell you pretty confidently it wasn't Derrick Rose that was lobbying for them to make a change. As for whether, players were saying that in exit interviews, I'm sure there was some of it. I'm guessing probably the extent of it was kind of overblown, because this is something that kind of happens when a coach leaves on not very friendly terms. You kind of saw this a few years ago. Remember when the Red Sox fired Terry Francona, and then suddenly there were all these leaks to the press from the Red Sox side about how, he had lost the players and all this stuff. It seems like it's kind of damage control to make it look like the front office was the good guys and, hey, we were just doing what the players wanted. But, I think there was certainly a little bit of burnout with some of the players, particularly Joakim Noah and Pau Gasol. But I think the extent to which it's been reported is probably a little bit overblown.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that we're seeing right now is it's becoming the trend, is that clearly there's a window for coaches to get a team to a certain point and certain level. We even talk about this now with the exit of Scott Brooks from the Oklahoma City Thunder. And it leads me to wonder, they would decide to go with Billy Donovan now as the new head coach for the Thunder. And, if everything points towards Fred Hoiberg being the head coach, how do you look at those two situations? Former college head coaches now coming into the NBA with opportunities to coach superstars. And it's not quite the same situation as Steve Kerr coaching, the Golden State Warriors, not having that ability to as far as coaching those superstars. I mean, how do you look at that? And do you think that it can work for the Chicago Bulls?
I absolutely think it could work. It's kind of a risky move, obviously, both in their case and in the case of the Thunder bringing in Billy Donovan. You're bringing in a guy who has no NBA coaching experience whatsoever. Obviously, he's done a lot at the college level and is very accomplished at that level. I think they're kind of hoping. Now, Steve Kerr is the one situation you guys bring up. But then, if you look at, the Celtics brought in Brad Stevens, who had also never been an NBA coach before of any kind. And he's had tremendous success. Obviously, the Celtics aren't title contenders at all right now just because of where their roster is at. But you can't really look at the Celtics and say Brad Stevens hasn't done about as good of a job as he could have. But yeah, it is kind of a risk if you look at where both of those teams are at in their development. The Thunder basically have 1 year to convince Kevin Durant not to leave in free agency, and then Russell Westbrook is up the year after that, and so is Serge Ibaka. So, there is a lot of pressure on Billy Donovan to be successful right away, and to a lesser extent, the same is true with, if everything, as you said, points to Fred Hoiberg being the next Bulls coach. Joakim Noah is up next summer for a new contract. Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson and Nikola Mirotic are up the year after that. So they're going to, and none of their guys are really very young. Noah's already 30. Taj Gibson is going to be 30 by the time he's a free agent. They aren't exactly, a young team with a lot of time to compete. So yeah, for these first-time NBA coaches, there's a lot of pressure on them. But at the same time, I think one of the things that the Bulls were really looking for is someone who's more of an offensive coach than maybe Tom Thibodeau was. And that's one area where Fred Hoiberg has been tremendously successful at the college level.
So as we talk about, Hoiberg moving in and obviously in Thibodeau moving out, are you a little bit surprised that some of these other teams moved on with the rumor that Thibodeau would probably be let go, that some of these teams moved on without him? And now in lieu of him being let go, do you see him finding a job or just probably sitting out this entire next season?
Well, I mean, there really aren't any more openings. The Denver is the only one that's still open, and it's from everything I've heard about the Denver situation. They're either going to just promote Melvin Hunt, who was the interim coach after they fired Brian Shaw during the season. That's probably what's going to happen. And then they're talking to Mike Malone and Mike D'Antoni. They kind of have their own coaching search going on. They aren't really interested in Tom Thibodeau. And then if you look at the Magic just hired Scott Skiles, the Pelicans just hired Alvin Gentry, the Thunder obviously already hired Billy Donovan to replace Scott Brooks. They don't really have there really aren't a lot of coaching openings. So I think what's probably the most likely scenario is Thibodeau basically just sits out next year, he collects his $4.5 million from the Bulls, and then next summer there are going to be more coaching jobs open, and he'll be pretty highly in demand then, because a team that wants to interview him or hire him won't have to give up any compensation for draft picks to talk to him. I think if Kobe Bryant retires, the Lakers will probably decide that Byron Scott isn't their long-term guy. So that's one possibility. Or maybe in Minnesota, Flip Saunders decides he isn't really the long-term coach and he wants to step away and bring in somebody else, and then Thibodeau would have the opportunity to coach Andrew Wiggins plus whoever they take with the number 1 pick this year, which I'm sure that'd be a very attractive opportunity for him. So he'll have options, but I think he's probably going to sit out a year, which I don't know what he's going to do for a year. My impressions of him, and also a lot of players I've talked to, current and former players, the guy basically has no life outside of basketball, so I really don't know what he's going to do. Maybe he does TV, maybe he winds up on somebody's bench as an assistant, but I think there really aren't going to be any opportunities for him to be a head coach next season unless another job unexpectedly opens up.
Bleacher Report columnist Sean Highkin joining us here on the Baseline, our segment of The Drop. We're talking about the coaching carousel scenario, a lot of moves and a lot of shakings going down. Sean, let's talk about the hiring, the Orlando Magic with Scott Skiles again. Myself and Shaw, we're scratching our head on this one, and it's not to say that Scott Skiles is not a good coach, not to say that maybe over the last few years he's probably figured out what to do and what not to do, probably more so on the latter side of things. But I just don't get what the Orlando Magic were thinking, getting Scott Skiles again, especially with this young team. You got a lot of talented pieces. A couple of guys are probably going to be on their way out the door. What were the expectations for the Magic in them making this move to get Scott Skiles?
Well, Scott Skiles, I think, is a pretty similar coach to Tom Thibodeau, just in terms of his intensity and just like the way he gets guys to play hard and his defensive mindset. I think the thing with the Magic, they want to make the playoffs. They've missed the playoffs 3 years in a row ever since they traded Dwight Howard, and they have a lot of pieces. If you look at their roster, they have a lot of young guys who are promising: Nikola Vucevic, Elfrid Payton, Victor Oladipo. They have the 5th pick in the draft this year, so they're going to get another guy. Aaron Gordon, I think they still think very highly of as a prospect. So they have a lot of pieces. They're still going to try to, they're still rebuilding, but I think they are wanting to take the next step and actually being competitive. And maybe I think to do that, their rationale was that they have to, get a coach who's really just going to work guys hard and get a lot out of them. And the thing has been with Scott Skiles everywhere he's been, whether it's been Phoenix, Chicago, Milwaukee, everywhere he's been as a coach, he gets guys to improve a lot in the short term, and then he kind of wears them down in the long term, sort of like Tom Thibodeau. But I think they think in the short term he was the best guy to make that push from being a lottery team to being a playoff team.
I can really see that backfiring on Orlando a little bit, and I'm not down on Scott Skiles because I think even alluded to a little bit. He's one of those coaches who seem to have a shelf life. The first few years are really, really good, and then at some point he wears, or whatever the case may be. And he's already talking about players are going to have to earn their minutes, which is, again, is a common narrative for coaches, especially. But with him, he really will pull guys out. He'll pull out the entire starting 5, 4 minutes into the first quarter if he doesn't feel like they're doing their proper rotations. Do you see guys like, and I think he already had a run-in with Tobias Harris in Milwaukee, do you see guys like Harris and Oladipo and Vucevic not being able to fall under what Scott Skiles is trying to teach them?
Well, they're going to have to, and I think there's a pretty good chance that Tobias Harris isn't going to be with the Magic next year. Skiles is a guy that never played him, and he's a restricted free agent coming up, and they're already so deep at the wings, with Aaron Gordon, who they just drafted. They've got that they've really committed to that Victor Oladipo, Elfrid Payton backcourt. They have Nikola Vucevic at the center if they draft another big man, and there's really not going to be a lot of minutes for Harris, especially with the kind of money he's probably going to command. You got a team like the Knicks that are probably going to be going hard after him in free agency. I would imagine that Harris is probably not going to be with the team next year. But yeah, it's gonna be kind of a kind of a culture shock for these young players with the Magic to go to a coach like Scott Skiles, who's just going to basically expect them to play like a title contender right away. And that's just kind of the reality of it, though. But I think the guys that they have there have the right mindset. If you look at a guy like Victor Oladipo, you look at a guy like Alfred Payton, those guys have always been workers. Those guys, I think, are going to, at least in the short term, respond well to Scott Skiles.
Our man Sean Highkin here joining us. You can catch him on the Twitter at Highkin. Let's go ahead and take a look at the hiring with the Pelicans of Alvin Gentry. I'm finding this to be a very intriguing hire. Weeks back, myself and Shaw, we really scratching our heads at the way that the Pelicans basically ushered Mr. Monty Williams out of the door. And I said, whoever it is that they get, I don't know if it's going to be a matter of convincing a guy, their future MVP guy, AD, to stay a Pelican. But whoever it is that they're going to hire is going to obviously have to be someone that's going to acquiesce the skill set of what this guy has done, which has had a phenomenal year last year. And, obviously you want that to keep going. Alvin Gentry has been that kind of guy. He works well with, the more high-powered offensive teams. But I'm just wondering, is that the top sell? I mean, at the end of the day, you want the Pelicans to keep AD there. And I'm sure the NBA would love to see that happen too. But how realistic is it that Alvin Gentry can get this team to play up to the potential that they're capable of, or clearly what Monty Williams wasn't able to do for them over these last 5 years? Well,
if you look at Alvin Gentry's track record, he's been a part of 3 of the best offenses of the modern era. He was an assistant under Mike D'Antoni with the 7 seconds or less era Suns. He was an assistant with the Clippers last year when they had one of the best offenses in the league. And then obviously with the Warriors this year, who were kind of historically great, one of the best, at least regular season teams of all time. And obviously they're in the finals, so they've done pretty well in the playoffs too. I think, it was obvious he was going to get a job somewhere, whether that was, in New Orleans and Orlando. I think Chicago was even looking at him as a fallback plan if the Fred Hoiberg stuff fell through. But yeah, I mean, he's, a much more, offensive-minded coach and much more innovative coach than Monty Williams does. I think it's going to be great, the pairing of him and Davis. And as far as Davis leaving, that is not really going to happen for a while. Like, it's something they're maybe going to have to worry about in 2019 or 2020 because he has 1 year left on his rookie deal. They're going to offer him a 5-year max extension. I don't see any way they don't offer him that. And really nobody turns down the rookie max extension. That's really just not something that happens. It's kind of a no-brainer. They're going to give it to him, and he's probably going to just accept it right away. If you look at all the guys at that level that have gotten the rookie extension, John Wall got it with the Wizards, Blake Griffin got it with the Clippers, Derrick Rose got it with the Bulls coming off his MVP year, Kyrie Irving got it with the Cavaliers, Paul George got it with the Pacers. It seems like it's pretty open and shut that Anthony Davis is going to sign a 5-year extension, and so we won't even be worrying about him being a free agent until 2020 or 2021 probably.
So before we move on, with this Gentry hiring, do you feel like, again, I want to get your take on it. It happened obviously a couple of weeks ago, but do you feel Monty Williams did get a raw deal in that situation in New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only real problem, and I think I can understand, not keeping him around. I think they have to decide at a certain point. They made the playoffs, for the first time since they drafted Anthony Davis, and actually for the first time since they traded Chris Paul to the Clippers a few years ago. And I think they needed to just decide, is this our guy? Is this the guy we really want to have as our guy for the future? And if not, Anthony Davis is 22 years old. They want to get the most out of the next few years of his career before they have to start thinking about his free agency. And if they decided that Monty Williams wasn't the guy that was best suited to do that, now is the time to make a change. And it doesn't really matter if Monty was popular with the players, which he, by all accounts, he was. All the players really liked him. But if they felt like they can do better, then, you got to make that move at some point.
Our man Sean Highkin joining us. Sean, before we let you go, man, let's talk about the scenario here. I feel like there's always a glamour article thing going on the back scenes and stuff like that. Brian Shaw, listen, I know everybody's loving him on NBA TV at doing his spot segments and stuff, but the word is that he's possibly going to replace or should be replacing Alvin Gentry as the Golden State Warriors assistant head coach. Is this a good thing? Number one, for the Golden State Warriors, because we know how Brian Shaw is, he's somewhat of a defensive minded type of guy, and the Warriors have got that balance. Is this a good look for the Warriors? This is a good look for Brian Shaw, who, we and a lot of people have always been lobbying that, the guy should be a head coach. And, he really didn't do that great of a job in Denver, but we didn't think that he got a really great deal either, giving the opportunity to coach that Nuggets team previously.
Well, that's interesting, the idea of him being being a new assistant for the Warriors. The thing is, they have Ron Adams really as their defensive coordinator. If they're going to hire another assistant coach to replace Alvin Gentry was really more the offensive mind behind what the Warriors are doing this year. So I don't know if that's really a lot of a fit, but Shaw certainly deserves another shot as a coach, whether it's at a head coach or an assistant coach level. He's had success there in the past, and there's really not a lot you can do with that roster that he was given in Denver. There, it was just kind of a disjointed roster. There's a lot of injuries. I don't think that you can close the book on him being an effective head coach in the NBA, but you'll just have to see when he gets another opportunity.
Really quick, Sean, do you think that it was a little surprising that it was Scott Skiles that was looked at to being the head coach for Orlando, and maybe not Brian Shaw? I mean, Brian Shaw was a former Magic player.
Well, so was Scott Skiles, and he has really deep ties with the Magic ownership group. From everything I've been hearing, this wasn't Rob Hennigan, the GM, that made this call. This was Alex Martins, the CEO. He has a really long relationship with Scott Skiles, and he's the one that was pushing for him. So I think that personal relationship is really what pushed it over. But if you look at the reports, they interviewed Mark Jackson, they interviewed Fred Hoiberg, they interviewed Mike Woodson. So they interviewed a few different people, but I think Skiles was just their guy the whole time.
All right, finally, Sean, let me ask you this, man. Out of these guys that we've talked about, who do you think has the inside track to having a more successful season? Right off the bat.
Out of the new coaching hires?
Out of the new coaching hires.
I think Alvin Gentry is probably the logical choice there, just because he's had success as a head coach before. And, also whenever you're going into a situation where you're getting Anthony Davis, who's 22 years old, already an MVP candidate, it's pretty hard to be better than that situation. If they make some roster moves this summer, I think they're going to have a pretty good team next year.
All right, he is the man, Sean Highkin. You can always catch him on Bleacher Report. You can also catch him on Twitter at Highkin. Sean, man, we really appreciate you hopping on with us, talking some NBA basketball head coach hirings, my man.
All right, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, good stuff from my man Sean Highkin. Was able to kind of hop on, last minute a little bit to kind of help us sort out, all of the crazy transactions happening with the hiring of coaches in the NBA, Sean. And, it's interesting that he said that Alvin Gentry could be the guy that may have, the track record of success, from the outset come this upcoming season. I'm a little shocked by that because of the fact that, they still are in the Southwest Division, and you still have to contend with the other four teams that, were just as equally good, if not better, than the New Orleans Pelicans. I was a little surprised that he didn't think that maybe Fred Hoiberg has as much a chance as any to possibly have a great season with this Chicago Bulls team that should still be intact.
Well, I think those are all great options, and my counter to that would probably be Billy Donovan. He has probably the best talented roster of all those coaches. With Durant and Westbrook, they can probably win in spite of Donovan, more or less, just because they're so good individually. So I think they all should have very, very good chances to be successful. And then when you look at New Orleans, that situation is a little bit tenuous because you don't know exactly what they don't have the players that they necessarily want to have to continue to move forward with Eric Gordon, with Tyreek Evans. I think they like those guys, but I don't know if they love those guys. And there's a lot of talk about, especially Gordon being moved, but his contract is so large. So I don't know. I think Donovan probably has the inside track simply because KD and Westbrook are, two of the top 5 or 6 players in the NBA. And that alone can just get you a lot of wins even in your rookie season.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's our segment, The Drop. We just finished having our man Sean Highkin help us break down the coaching hirings that's already taken place over the last week. And so now it's time for us. We gotta stay consistent. My man Shaw told me this off the air, so I gotta adhere to these things. We need to be consistent. So it's that time for the NBA Western and Eastern Conference Finals version of. Now, that means that we obviously have to give our proper send-offs to the Houston Rockets and to the Atlanta Hawks. Shaw, out of curiosity, Who do you think had the more disappointing series, the Atlanta Hawks or the Houston Rockets?
That's a great question. I tend to lean a little bit towards the Atlanta Hawks because they were the number one seed. And they had the injuries with DeMar Carroll, and he ended up coming back, and then Kyle Korver going down.
And you can make the argument that this was theirs for the taking. The writing was on the wall. An injured Kyrie Irving, a no-show of Kevin Love because he's gone for the rest of the season, and a bunch of scrap parts that were thrown in that obviously made David Griffin look like executive of the year, basically. So if we had to call it like that, there was a reason to justify the Hawks.
Yeah, I think for all those reasons you just mentioned, that's why I would go with Atlanta. Houston losing to Golden State is not. They have nothing to hang their heads about. Again, in the fashion they lost, then that's problematic to some degree. But Atlanta again, and Atlanta got swept. So when you look at it from that standard, I think the Hawks are definitely the more disappointing.
But let me play devil's advocate really quick though, Shaw. This is what James Harden wanted, right? He believed that his team was the better team, even probably better than the Golden State Warriors. Wasn't it just last year that this Houston Rockets team was better than the Golden State Warriors, so to speak? Like every time that they played them, the Rockets bested the Golden State Warriors. So how did the Warriors just become that good, that great in less than a year's time frame? And forget about the regular season. I'm just saying that like what we saw from this Warriors team, whether it be fresh legs, whatever, it doesn't matter. And the momentum that the Houston Rockets had coming back from a 3-1 deficit against the Los Angeles Clippers, get themselves in this position, and they just look like they gave up after game 3. They just, and maybe to some level or degree, it just felt like maybe this team will try and salvage a little bit of their pride, play really well. But even at their best, just didn't look like it would have been good enough for this Warriors team. Would you not be disappointed with how the way that the Rockets kind of got ousted?
Well, yes. But at the end of the day, they are still going to have their fallback in terms of they were probably the most injured team coming into the playoffs and not having their regular rotation. And by the time they got to the conference finals, they had figured out some of those things. They figured out, okay, well, we know how to play without Montezumas. We know how to play without Patrick Beverley. But all those guys were supposed to be key guys and key contributors to this team and to that roster throughout the season. And that didn't happen. And, you heard Beverley's name mentioned throughout the Western Conference Finals. Oh, would he have been able to, do a better job, obviously, than Jason Terry did on Stephen Curry. So I think the Rockets had a semi-built-in excuse, but the Golden State Warriors are just the best team in the NBA by all accounts. And I don't think they have anything to hang their heads about it. But again, Houston didn't have the best effort that they wanted to have.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of The Drop. All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and talk about the Atlanta Hawks team. Season's over with, season's done. Where does this Hawks team go from here? We can't keep the Atlanta Hawk fans, on a 1-year high. We got to believe that this is a path for continued success moving forward, right?
Well, you hope so. They have 2 guys in their starting lineup that are free agents, and Paul Millsap and DeMar Carroll. Millsap has indicated that he'd probably return. He loves the fact that Atlanta, what they've been able to build, and the fact how well they treated him coming into the city. DeMar Carroll is a little bit more of an interesting case. I think he's looking to potentially move on as of right now and receive a pretty big and significant pay upgrade. The Hawks, again, will they be able to get another big name free agent onto this roster? Will they be able to attract somebody who wants to come there and be a lead guy? But they have, T, they have Horford, and if they get Millsap, where does that lead guy come into, and they would probably have to be at that wing position. So I think Atlanta, I don't think anyone expects them to be the same 60-win team that they were this year. I think that was kind of an aberration. I don't think they're going to fall back as much as, say, the Charlotte Hornets did from last year to this year. But I don't think the Hawks are going to be running away with the Southeast Division again next season.
All right, Sean, let's go ahead and talk about that Houston Rockets team. Look, Daryl Morey, man, rolled the dice big time, and he's got some marquee players on that roster. Josh Smith, I got to think that with the way Josh Smith played with Kevin McHale as his head coach, he may actually take a liking to him wanting to stay. But that means, he's not going to be a guy that's going to be riding the bench. He's going to want to start. And then that probably means that Terrence Jones is going to be, a collateral damage, so to speak, which might not be a bad thing because we know a few teams that could definitely throw some money Terrence Jones's way. I mean, it's not like that guy is Limp Bizkit on the basketball court. The guy can ball. He just needs the opportunity.
Yeah, Terrence Jones, I think he's still under contract for another season. We'll be interested to see if they try to move him to try to maybe upgrade that point guard position. As it stands right now, Jason Terry is going to be coming off the book. So all intents and purposes, they're probably going to say goodbye to him. Corey Brewer has a player option, which he's probably going to take to return and be that spark off the bench. But again, Patrick Beverley is a free agent. KJ McDaniels is a free agent. He didn't really play much for them this season, but he was a piece that they wanted to get and hope for the future on that wing spot. They have some options. I know Harden has already went to or said he's going to go to talk to Daryl Morey and try to upgrade the point guard position specifically, and which they'll definitely need to do, especially if Beverley ends up walking away altogether. But Harden does not want to have all those playmaking responsibilities on him, despite the fact that he likes the ball in his hand. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see how they move that out. Some rumors out there that Ty Lawson may be a guy that they may be trying to move forward towards too. I don't know if that's the right move or if that would even come to fruition or not. But the Rockets, again, they have a very talented roster, just have some questions and some moving parts that they need to figure out.
Shaw, when you look at both of these teams, and it's kind of interesting because back, when we did our previews, our predictions about, what teams were going to do this season and the way that their rosters lined up, you had talked about how the Houston Rockets, this is who they are. They're probably going to be a team that caps out at maybe 50, 55 wins, per season. But with the way that James Harden has played, which arguably runner-up MVP type level, and to a lot of people, obviously, they think that he was truly the MVP of this season, and he can only get better. Does that mean that rate, that number of wins can get pushed up to the 60s, or will it take a major overhaul? Because you know what? A lot of talk has also been about the fact that this James Harden, Dwight Howard combination, this might not be the combination that gets James Harden that title, that gets him that ring. So, are we seeing maybe a better Rockets team come next year, or will they basically have flatlined out and this is what we're going to expect to see, and it's just going to be based on the rest of the competition in the Western Conference determining on how successful this Houston Rockets team can be?
I think that latter point you just mentioned is going to be huge for the Rockets' success. What do the other teams in the Western Conference do? How do they also improve and get better and compete out there? It's a dog eat dog world out in the Western Conference, and the Rockets are right in the middle of that. They're obviously very good. They can get to 50, 55 wins, as you mentioned. But again, they have some questions going into next season, and how do they fill these holes? If Terry and Beverley both leave, that's 2 point guards that are off this roster. Do you really want Nick Johnson as the starting point guard for this team moving forward? You're going to have to go out there and get somebody else to help Harden in the backcourt. And then again, you have to retain Josh Smith as well. So it all depends on the moves that Morey's been able to make, and he's proven to be a wheeler and dealer and been able to be very, very good when it comes to improving this roster. Mikhail has also improved as a coach, I think, from last year to this year, especially from the defensive side of things. Got them to buy into some principles that we didn't think Houston we would see from the Rockets. But again, a lot of it depends on their roster influx and then also what happens out in the Western Conference in general.
Yeah, man, it's going to be some interesting stuff happening, especially in this off season and also draft wise. What's going to happen with the Atlanta Hawks, and then clearly what kind of moves Daryl Morey is going to make for the Houston Rockets. But unfortunately, it's that time for both of these teams. It's their swan song. It's been a great run for them, but unfortunately, it stops here. And now everything points towards the NBA Finals with the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors. So unfortunately for the Houston Rockets and the Atlanta Hawks, on behalf of the NBA Baseline Podcast, it's family, friends, it's time for y'all to just go on, get. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was the drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now for us to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's rock.
All right, man. Not much on the docket. Come on, man. It's NBA Finals, so everybody's got to be fixated and focused, even the busybody people in the association. But there's been rumors that Greg Oden, the Oden one, is probably getting some looks and is out there in the grindhouse out in Memphis, man. What's the talk about Greg Oden possibly being a Grizzly?
have the sudden urge to talk about Thor and saying Odin's son.
Odin's son?
As we talk about Greg Oden. But I think this is an interesting move. I mean, he's had some off-the-court trouble that have kept him out of the NBA in the last year or so, obviously the injuries as well. I think he would be a suitable replacement if they were to lose Kosta Koufis. Obviously, not if they lose Marc Gasol. You can't be starting Greg Oden, regular minutes if you're the Memphis Grizzlies. But I think he's a insurance if they aren't able to retain Kosta Koufis. And I think it's worth a shot. I mean, all it would be a training camp invite. He's not guaranteed to make the team. So, hey, if you're in the Memphis Grizzlies, why not?
I mean, listen, Greg Oden can give you probably a whole lot more than what Vince Carter gave the Memphis Grizzlies for most of this season. So, I mean, anything could be a possible good look. Out in Washington, listen, man, you talk about going off the wall. Our man John Wall getting kicked off of an airline flight. What is up with J-Dub, man?
Man, we don't even know. This story it's a little bit wacky. Some of the details are still coming in, but more or less he and his entourage kind of got into an altercation with some people on the plane, and American Airlines said, listen, you know what, whatever, it got too big, got too hectic where they wanted it, and they removed him from the flight. John Wall has been pretty clean since coming into the NBA, not too many issues, but there have been some things about Wall and throwing up gang signs in games and stuff like that. I don't know if this has anything to do with any of that, and I don't want to speculate, but you'd hope that Wall can behave himself, get his entourage to behave themselves, and they don't have these type of negative publicity stunts going out there.
Shaw, shameless plug in entourage, shameless pulling events on a flight, shameless.
I'm a fan.
Entourage, I'm telling you. Out in Miami, Dwayne Wade thinking about taking his bags, taking Gabrielle Union and the kids and rolling up out of the South Beach area. What is up with the rumors that Dwayne Wade and Heat management are at an impasse?
Man, this is insane. I just can't see this happening. But Wade took less money in lieu of LeBron leaving. Everyone knows all that money kind of went to Chris Bosh, and that there's going to be a new TV deal, so that the Miami Heat and all of the NBA teams are going to have a lot more money to spend going into the salary cap moving forward. And Wade is saying basically he wants to get paid. He's sacrificed. He's Mr. Wade County. He's all those things for the Miami Heat. And he's saying now that he wants to get paid and justifiably so. However, if the Heat management are just like, listen, you're 30 plus years old. You've been breaking down. You play 50, 55 games a year. They don't want to go ahead and max him out. I think this is something that may actually have some real bite to it. I can't see it ending in Wade leaving Miami. I think they figured it out one way or the other, especially being in the Miami area, hearing so much about Heat lifers and how much it's Wade County and all those things, especially since LeBron left. But it's very interesting to see that this has even come to fruition to begin with. But I can't see Miami letting go Dwayne Wade leave.
Oh my God! And if the Cleveland Cavaliers lose in the NBA Finals. Oh, jeez. I even dread the thought. I don't even want to think about it. I'm not even trying to finish that sentence. I think Cleveland fans are clamoring. They're thinking win-win situation no matter what happens. I don't even want to talk about it. All right, Sean. And finally, out in LA, the Doc had to mediate. He had to basically make sure that everything is all good with his players, especially after that disappointing choke job against the Houston Rockets and failing to make it to the Western Conference Finals. But he did say, with amidst the rumors, that there was beef between Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan. He's letting everybody know it's all good. We got this.
Well, I mean, that's what he has to say. He's also the general manager too, so he's got to play kind of like the PR guy too for the Clippers. And he's saying, hey, that they need each other, and that Chris Paul is one of those guys who just wears on you anyway, because he wants to win so bad, and that probably is the case. But I think DeAndre Jordan is looking, and casting his net wide to see if he's going to have suitors out there. Obviously, Dallas and some other teams out there are looking at him. But I think he's probably going to be retained, especially when he sees all those dollar signs and all those O's that Doc Rivers put behind the contract offer, and I think he'll be able to stay with Chris Paul, as Doc has alluded to.
And I think, if this is probably where Doc Rivers, the general manager, comes into play, that he didn't have to deal with the Danny Ainge. Remember what he did with Kendrick Perkins. And what I think he definitely wants is he wants to keep the kind of hard work that he got out of DeAndre Jordan, especially over these last couple of years. He doesn't want to see that go to the wayside or get, where it's been taking advantage of another potential good team that could utilize his services and help propel them to be better than what the Clippers, what he thinks are better at. So I just feel like he wants to keep DJ, no question. You don't put in this kind of effort. If the only thing that's left is this guy to shoot free throws, he'll get that boy right. It's not like Kendrick Perkins shot good free throws when he was a Boston Celtic either, and the Celtics won a championship in 2008. I think he's going to do what he has to do as general manager and head coach to keep his big happy, because that's the way it's got to be out in LA. Awesome stuff, Shaw, as we do our thing here in Coast to Coast, and just an awesome show in general, man. You talk about a lineup. I feel like we had the NBA Finals lineup, having our man Howard Beck and our boy Sean Highkin joining us this week to help break down a litany of good stuff that's going to be rolling into what is just arguably the best week of NBA basketball. It's come to this, my man.
Yeah, we definitely supersized it, man, and hopefully the fans are going to get obese off the knowledge that we were able to provide with our great special guests, Howard Beck and Sean Highkin. Again, kudos and thanks to them for coming on. I think it was a great show, and we saved, the best for the NBA Finals, man. So we'll see what happens, who's actually going to come out ahead between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then we'll roll right into the NBA draft and have some more great guests coming on for that too. But this was an amazing show. As always, it's a pleasure and honor to work with you and definitely to serve the fans and listeners of the Baseline.
Most definitely, man. So, without further ado, it's time for us to do our send-off for the Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw, I'd like to thank our special guests once again, Howard Beck, Sean Highkin, for hopping on with us, helping us break down some really, really good stuff, get some good NBA topics going on for you, the listeners, and for us here. But we couldn't do it without you guys. So for the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.